attempt.
And
Roger, did you manage to record what's his name's?
yes, I did. Yes, I won't say I panicked unnecessarily, but I did record it and I have put it on the Facebook site along with the others.
I'll have a look then. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, let's have a attempt at this. Share screen, and there, and now then slideshow. Come on, from beginning. Okay, there we go. Have we got that?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Super. Okay. Right. Now, what I will say in advance is this is a look at the printing technology, and some of the, as well as the stamps. So some of this might be old hat to some of you, and some of it might be new to some of you. So I think the best bet is, if anybody's got any questions, ask them at the time rather than wait to the end, because otherwise you might miss something and the whole thing will get rather confusing. So so let's start. Right. So I thought we'd start by looking at some of the printing presses. And this is one of the Albion printing presses. This was the mainstay of De La Rue's printing process for a very long time. And there were lots of these built. In fact, there are still quite a number of artisan printers who are still using these machines. There were so many of them made. So it's a hand machine. Hang on, where's my bit? So this is the pressure plate. This is the base. And if we look at the next one, right, that's with it opened up. And the important bits to notice, because they'll be important later, is this metal frame system here is called the chase. And that's what holds the plates in place. And in this case, you can see a plate held in position in this central, and they're clamped up. So it's important to understand that you had this base, and then the plates are dropped in and clamped up with special clamping mechanisms. So you can, so they're held firmly in position. And if we look at the next picture, this is a little diagrammatic representation. So once again, you've got the chase, you've got a plate in the center here. It's all sitting on this bottom bed. And these are the other important bits. The tympan, this is a frame with, it used to be oiled silk, onto which the paper is placed, either stuck on or whatever. In the case of De La Rue, certainly at later stages, I think when this tympan was opened up, it came against a back plate on which there were a couple of 2 or more pins poking through, so the paper could be positioned on the pins, the frisket lowered so that it holds the paper in place, and then it rotated down onto the print surface, into the machine, platen, pressure, back out, take off, do the same again. So that's that. And in fact, if you look at quite a lot of these, this is plate 2 from the Crown Agents issue, but you'll notice here, this hole, this is the registration hole, and I think this is where the pins held the paper, so that on your second print, so on the first printing, it's pinned on. On the second printing, there is a hole in position, which is marked by this cross, which is on the print surface, so that it can be accurately positioned to print in this case, Antigua and 4 pence. So I think that's, and I'm pretty certain that's how De La Rue did their registration process. There were a number of other print presses out there. This is a roller press. This is actually the Perkin-Bacon one. The odd thing about these is virtually none have survived. So I don't think there were that many around. And I'm not even sure whether De La Rue used this, because they did report that they supplied roller presses to St. Petersburg for printing playing cards. But it might have been these, or it might have been something like this, which is a lithographic press. And this is what I said about to Peter. This is a straightforward lithographic press, and the design really hasn't changed that much. There's a bed here which the stone sits on. You've got the standard Tympan and Frisket system that you had on the Albion printing presses, and you just wind it in and out basically. And this is either a roller or a doctor blade with applied pressure. This handle jacks this down. They're very simple systems to use, and they're still, the basic design remains in use today for lithographic printing. That's almost an aside though. Okay. Now, as far as Sarawak is concerned, perhaps the most important change that occurred at De La Rue was back in about 1879. And this was a letter to the Inland Revenue, Somerset House, basically, as I'll paraphrase. See, the whole of our adhesive stamp manufacture up to and within the last few months has been conducted by hand processes, i.e. probably hundreds of Albion presses, certainly an awful lot of them. But as we have said, it became necessary for us in regard to the penny postage stamps to initiate what practically amounts to a complete revolution in the process of manufacture and in the machinery and apparatus engaged therein. And that was the advent of the penny lilacs. So several of the processes which hitherto have been performed by hand, we now arranged to perform by machine. And that installed steam plant, and this is a slightly more advanced version of a Wharfedale printing machine. Now the hand processes could do about 50 sheets an hour. These could do about 500 sheets an hour, and they were quite complex machines. This is the main roller, the pressure roller. There are inking cylinders here, and the plate sits down under here and basically is driven through. So it's inked, it goes under the pressure roller. The pressure roller also brings the paper down, pops out the other side, and then the bed drops down and it goes back to be able to take off. And very simple system, but very complicated at the same time. Right. And the other critical bit is the key plate process. The key plate process was developed much earlier, and we saw with that Antigua, where you have a basic design and then the values and country can be stuck in afterwards. It was very convenient in terms of cost, particularly for small countries, because you had to have a die to start with, and they were expensive. They were very complicated to make. So here we have, so the cost of the die is basically £200, which was a lot of money. And from that, a working die is made. And then they then can make the plate from the working die. And we won't go into all the complications of making the leads at this point. If you wanted a whole series of stamps of different values, if you did it by the standard process, then every single stamp would require a £200 head die, which is not economic for small countries. Whereas if you had the key plate process, then the duty dies, i.e. the bit that puts in the value, were much, much cheaper. So as you can see, £12 a plate as opposed to all these additional costs. And De La Rue didn't charge for the dies for the duty plates, which is interesting, and maybe associated with the fact that they had dies for a whole range of shapes and values already in existence. Now, if you add the wharf dial in, you can see that, I mean, I've just done this for one printing of Sarawak, the first printings of Sarawak. You've got a single head die or key plate die, and so all of these sheets can be printed on the wharf dial machine, 500 sheets an hour, 3.7 hours to print the whole lot in terms of the first bit of the process. The time-consuming bit is putting all the values in, and that adds up to a staggering 500 to 10 hours for each 500 sheet batch, give or take a smidgen. But it's still a lot cheaper than having paid all this money for a die for each value. Right. The other thing that's quite important for Sarawak is this. In 1887, they wrote again to the Control of Stamps, Inland Revenue. As we have already explained to you verbally, we believe that if the lines were placed round the panes of stamps, as indicated on the enclosed dummy sheet, it would assist and improve the work very much. And in fact, the board acquiesced to them carrying out this experiment with the penny lilac. And this was because there were problems with damaging the plates on using the wharf dial machine. Right, so this is the penny lilac. These are the, so up until effectively this point, the penny lilac plates had nothing round the outer edges, and this tended to result in damage to the frame lines. In March 1887, plates 65 and 66 were put to press with marginal rules. So this is that period, and this is one of the earlier plates, and this is, well, I don't own this. This is really irritating, but I don't own this. This is either plate 65 or 66 with the marginal rule, and the marginal rules were a single line round the outside, part of the plate, I hasten to add, and in the early days certainly just with rounded corners.
Malcolm, can I ask a question, please? It's John.
You can.
Just going back a bit to the printing of the Sarawak stamps. So basically, the head plate went through their faster rotary machine, and then they had to put in the duty on each of those sheets, and they did that with the old hand printing, the old platinum thread.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Now, and interestingly, Sarawak is the place where that bit of information comes from. We'll get to that in a minute. The Jubilee issue was the first issue where they went for these particular new designs and for printing on the wharf dial machines. So and there were three basic designs that became very important. Penny halfpenny design with this rectangular with rounded corners, the tuppenny with the fancier corners, and the 5 penny with the two panels. So these are designs that have sort of evolved within De La Rue. So the corner panels design appears on a number of places. The first one was in fact, funnily enough, very, very soon after, which was for the Siamese government. Because these plates were made in January, so the dies were made, and we were 1886, so we're just before they decided or looked at marginal rules. So these plates have no marginal rules. And interestingly, at this point, De La Rue, of course, are printing the penny lilacs, and they have no plate numbers. They only have control periods. So we have, that's one of the designs. And of course, De La Rue, Sarawak has this design, which is the rectangular with the rounded corners. But because this was a little bit later, the plate, when it was made, was specifically made with marginal rules and was designed with that rather nice thing that we're all so used to. So we have a single 60 image plate. So that bit is the head plate, obviously. That can be printed on the Wharfdale machine. It has a margin rule to protect it. Everything fits in with the story. And you will notice, of course, we've still got this pin registration in the center of the plate, top and bottom, to enable it to be registered on the hand machine to print the duties, the values. Right. Okay, there's just a pretty picture of that first issue and a cut down die proof, as you see. So that's the head plate with the blank, so that when it's printed that's blank, and then these can be inset on the hand machines. And from Sarawak's point of view, I've just included this. The new postage stamps were really ticked all the boxes. They were much easier to handle. They didn't stick together. And of course, they started selling significant numbers to the philatelists of the world. Right. Now there's a full sheet. So as I've already said, margin rules, no plate numbers. The additional things to consider are these are the pinning, what are called the pinning points in these four corners. And these were used to accurately locate the sheet for the perforations. And because these are printed typographically, the paper is dry. It's never wetted, so it never moves. So you can do comb perforations very accurately, as opposed to all the issues associated with damping the paper for line engraved or lithographic printing. So that's the 8 cents from the first sheet. Right, now this is the, well, I consider this is going to be, this is an interesting bit, and I think this is where Sarawak's special place within the De La Rue system comes into effect. So this is the 1888 2 cents issues. Now, there were 4 printings. These are the first 2, and there's very little difference between the 2. The only real differences are associated with very slight changes in shade and slight differences in the printing of the registration piece here. This one's been blurred out, but the bottom, you can see there's a slight ring round. So you can actually, if you've got positional pieces, easily distinguish the 2. It was the 3rd and 4th printing that were unusual. Now the 3rd printing is incredible, as far as I can tell at the moment, is incredibly rare, because it's got a double jubilee, it's got a double marginal rule. So this suggests that both the head plate and the duty plate were printed on a machine. And we'll get to that in a minute. So this is the 3rd printing, and it's very different from the 4th printing, which is much more common, which is the one where we have the very distinctive aniline shade of red. And this was a period when they'd lost their very, very knowledgeable ink man. Hugo Müller had retired, and I think they had, well, they did have a lot of problems. So this penetration of the ink through to the back of the stamp is common, not only, well, it happens entirely on this printing, but is also found on quite a number of other printings of other countries.
Malcolm, why do you keep calling them, probably correct, double marginal rules or single marginal rules, whereas we all call them Jubilee lines?
Because that's what De La Rue actually called them. They became known as Jubilee lines because they first appeared on the Jubilee issue.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
So, yes, so that's their common parlance, but they are actually a marginal rule in that they're a rule around the margins of a plate or multiple plates.
Yeah.
So I'm just being a bit anally retentive, really.
That's okay. No. I'm not going to rewrite my whole.
Oh no, God, no, because they're commonly known as Jubilee lines, so it's not a problem.
Yeah.
So suddenly we have 1897-ish. I've got that wrong, haven't I? That was 1896 or so, not 1889. I'll cross-check that. Anyway, suddenly we see these double margin rules on Sarawak stamps. There is no, so far, I have no evidence of any other country where you have a two-part process for small numbers where we find these double rules. There are some countries that do have double rules, but they're all associated with very large volume printing, where I think the rule was built into the plate. Now these, I'm suggesting the rule is not built into the duty plate. So there's a few reasons for that. So this is actually quite an important bit of paper, oddly. And this was the postmaster of Sarawak wrote to La Rue in 1909, I hasten to add, to inquire about why some of the stamps they were getting had two lines around the outside as opposed to one, because of course, if you look back, most of their stamps were coming with single lines around the outside, but every so often one would turn up with two lines around the outside. And so De La Rue wrote back, and the critical bit is sometimes the stamps are printed by hand and sometimes by machine, according to the quantity ordered. Then they are printed by machine. When they are printed by machine, a double borderline is shown, when by hand a single borderline. But I think that they were using the Stamps of Sarawak to experiment with this borderline on the duty plates, because when you look at the numbers, there is no justification for the double lines on some of the values that we see them on. So if we go, we saw that on the 1888 issue. On the 1899 issue, again, we have a new die head, but the duty plates for all the stamps are the same duty plates that were made for the first issue. And in fact, the duty plates carry on being used, as far as I can ascertain, right through until 1928, because they didn't get that much use, very quite small numbers. Occasionally they would make a new duty plate, so this is the 20 cents duty plate when that was required. But apart from that, what we find on this issue is right. We got the 2 cents, the 4 cents, the 8 cents, the 12 cents, and the 25 cents values. So not all high volume numbers had at least one printing with a double marginal rule. And in many cases, more than one printing had a double marginal rule. In all cases, all of those cases, there are single marginal rules known as well. Now, Simon has the only copy currently of a 25-cent showing a single marginal rule, in fact.
Do I?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
You do. You kindly sent me a scan of it.
Thank you.
But currently, so that suggests, so one of the 25-cent printings had a single rule, but the others, and I think there were 4, yes, there were 4 printings, all appear to have had double rules. And yet the 25-cent is not a high volume stamp. So again, I think all of this tends to suggest that they developed a form for the marginal rule, so they could drop the plate for the duty values into a marginal rule and stick it on the big machine. And the reason they did it for Sarawak and nobody else is that Sarawak stamps are printed on plain paper, whereas virtually all of the Crown Agents and the Treasury's printings were on watermarked paper, and every sheet of watermarked paper had to be accounted for, whereas Sarawak's were unwatermarked and De La Rue did not have to account for the paper they used. So they could quite happily experiment with Sarawak stamps and the Sarawak plates without having to worry about any wastage at all. So I think that Sarawak was in fact used as a test bed over a long period of time, right through the early years of the century, to perfect being able to print the duties on the big machines. And here, I mean, typically the 2 cents is quite well known with single and double marginal rules. There are 21 printings. The chances of identifying them all are pretty close to 0, but I'm working on the problem. Now, these are examples of double marginal rules, but these are all, interestingly, on very high volume printings. And you will note also that the head plate, or duty or key plate in this case, which has got the broken marginal rules, is the head in the middle here, and that's printed first because that's got a plate number, and then the duties are the outers, and in this case they all have continuous rules. Well, no, there's this whole series of experiments with different rules and broken rules and goodness knows what, but basically the only stamps I can find with double marginal rules are typically these type of high volume prints. Nothing from the smaller colonies at all, right through the early imperiums of both Victoria and Edward. So anybody spots any double rules on anything like that. 1918, and once again, new die. But again, bear in mind, as far as I can tell, all of the duties are still the same ones that were made back in 1888. And we get the standard De La Rue 60 image plate, in this case, plate 1 again, single marginal rules, but also, again, variable. So single marginal rules, double marginal rules for virtually all of the values. And so these are examples of the double marginal rules. These are pretty good, but this is the other interesting thing. We do begin to see some with broken marginal rules. And these are from the De La Rue archive. They're from the Royal's publication of the De La Rue archive. And you will notice here we have two of the values. They both have a marginal rule for the duty plate, and I think it's the same marginal rule from the damage observed round the edges of these. And I also think this may be why the De La Rue archive of Sarawak stamps is so large. So they kept so many sheets of Sarawak stamps in the archive, which, bearing in mind it was a relatively small country with a relatively small print runs and output, is slightly unusual.
I had the honour, enviable task of doing the writing up of those archives for the Royal Book.
Mm-hmm.
In hindsight, it should have been you.
Yeah, but I didn't know about this at the time. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But you can see that there are obvious.
I was asked because I possessed mostly or an awful lot of the archival material that was in the book.
Yeah.
You should have done it, not me.
Well, it was done. That was the important thing, Simon.
Yeah.
We have the record. So you can see that looks remarkably like it's the same marginal rule, but for two different values. Oh, hang on.
Can I just make a point about that last?
Hang on. Yeah.
What that would tell me is that the plate entered the machine by the left-hand side of the sheet. So that was the impact point.
It's very likely that was the impact side, indeed, Len. Yes. Yeah. And it's still difficult to understand. I've got a whole load of bits and pieces in terms of observing damage developing on these marginal rules. But it's difficult to tell exactly how that damage occurred, though the next slide shows something quite interesting. And this is again from the archive. It's obviously a bit. And you can see two things. One, this is that external broken marginal rule. But in this case, what's happened is it started to come apart. Because if you look here, can you see that this lower row is starting to come down and this is splitting out? And I think this was a failure. For whatever reason, this was a failure of the marginal rule clamped round the duty plate, started to fail, and obviously wasn't clamped properly, so it's moved. And De La Rue retained this in April 24 because that's what happened, and then presumably the duty plate had to be refurbed, and I think this is the last time at which we see this particular damaged marginal rule. Can't be certain at the moment because not enough data, but all that would suggest is that in fact is what happened. It started to come apart.
Malcolm, is
Yes.
that why the 8-cent value tablet is dropping on
Yes.
the leftmost stamp?
Yeah,
The whole thing is moving southwards.
I think the plate, because don't forget, these are sort of sitting up on a lower plate. And I think this is holding it all together, this outer rim, and it's failed, and therefore the whole thing has gone and probably fractured somewhere in here. Sorry, okay, you can't see my finger. Somewhere up here, because these are in line and these are now dropping off. So it looks to me like there was a plate fracture occurring. So I mean, I think that's quite that combined with the other ones is quite a telling feature, and the fact that you don't see this break any later than this point. The 28 issue's interesting as well, because of course they had to remake the plate and remake the duty plates. Now, you could argue that they would have remade the duty plates with a marginal rule built in. However, the 5 cent, and it's the only one, comes with both double and single marginal rules, which suggests that we still have a situation where the duty plates go into a external marginal rule.
Can I see the last sheet again, please?
Yep.
That's when it went to 100.
Yes, it's when it went to 100.
Because up until then, it's fantastic that De La Rue in the early years realised it would be using A4 papers to exhibit stamp, A4 sheets to exhibit stamp. Of course, they got to the 1928 issue and completely buggered it all up.
Yes, they did, didn't they? I've had to go to A3. It's really annoying, but there we go. And of course, it's and it applies to a lot of other countries as well. At around about, to a large extent, around about this point, obviously not for some of the high volume issues where 240 sheets, although in many respects, quite often the 240s are in fact 4 panes of 60 still. So
the thing is, you and I have got loads and loads of panes of the earlier issue. I have not seen a complete sheet. I have not seen a complete sheet of these.
No, nor have I. You've got, I think, the largest extant
of the
whole piece.
Yeah.
At the moment, certainly I've not seen.
I've got the top strip. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I haven't got. I've never seen a whole sheet. And I've got lots of sheets of all the other ones, but not.
No, I haven't either. Probably because they don't fit onto A4.
And maybe that the moment they went to the post office, because of the size of the books they had, they immediately split them down the middle like this.
That's also possible. I think
because the post office still do today.
Yes,
your postman before sticky labels, the postman would always split the sheets up.
So yes, so it's a problem. For
Malcolm, do we know why they went to a sheet of 100? Because most of their customers would have still been in the sterling zone. I've always assumed that 60 was chosen because it makes accounting in pounds, shillings and pence very simple, whereas 100 obviously works fine with cents and dollars, but most of their clients would still have been in sterling. So what was the motivation to change from 60 to 100?
It's difficult to tell at this point. They were very resistant originally to changing from their 60 sheet format. In fact, there's quite a bit of correspondence about them pointing out that they don't want to do this, and they would have to build new perforators, which was a very telling argument in the early days, along with the issues about perforating through the margins. So there's a whole series of issues, and there were quite a few people in the cents and dollars type areas who would have preferred sheets of 100, but De La Rue were very, very resistant to changing from their 60, 120, 240 format for a very long time. Sorry,
the request came from Malaire itself, and De La Rue charged a premium over the standard rate because they needed more print passes to print the same number of stamps.
Really?
On a 120, yeah.
Ah, yes, because of course a 120 sheet could go through the machine quite happily. Yes, you're right. That's an interesting one. Oh,
I came across that in the archive recently.
Oh, if you could say, if you've got the data, that would be helpful, because yes, because Malaysia did have these earlier than Sarawak. But yes, they obviously didn't like it, and they were very resistant for a very long time, but eventually they succumbed. So as I said, in theory, you would have expected then the sheets to have all been built with a double Jubilee line, but there's two telling bits. One is this, the 5 cent, where there is one printing which hasn't got the second marginal rule, and the other is this. And the 30 cents, there are two printings, and one of them has got a continuous marginal rule, and the other one has got these broken corners, which is quite distinctive, but also it exists on some of the other values. Now, what is really irritating is I do not own this set of stamps. I was outbid on eBay some considerable time ago, but had the foresight to actually take a copy. And as you can see, we've got the 3 cent, the 8 cents, the 20 cents, the 16 cents, 10 cents as well, and the 30 cents all have this broken corner at the top right. Oh, right, that's it. So I'm hanging on to my hypothesis at the moment that and I'm now looking for examples of this in other countries and other printings of other stamps. I think there should be out there examples of these values with the bottom left corner also missing. I currently do not have any of them, but so there we are. That's my view. I think
our first thing is I go and trip and look at my box when my
super.
box.
If you've got anything, send me some copies, because I'm pretty certain that De La Rue developed this process because it made a lot of sense. It meant they could put them on the hand machines or onto the powered machines willy-nilly without any issues. And I suspect, but I have no proof at the moment, that the marginal rule, we should find this kind of damage on marginal rules for other countries as well. But of course, it's them finding it and which countries would they use. But I'm pretty certain it was the reason why Sarawak ended up with this from a very early point is that initially it was on unwatermarked paper, and the Crown agents and the Treasury had no say over what they did. And it was one of the very few countries that De La Rue printed for where that applied.
Malcolm, can I throw a hypothesis in?
Yes, by all means.
You notice that corner there is on the last broken rule we looked at would have been the opposite side to the impact side. Could I suggest that the reason we see some with the bottom left broken and some with top right broken is that it broke at the bottom left, and they turned the marginal rule upside down so that the undamaged side was receiving the impact.
You know, Len, that is an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of that. I have to be scrupulously honest. That means a lot more searching for for examples, but that's an very interesting possibility. Yes, because of course it's an entirely rotatable form.
Now,
yes,
you've described this as damage, but it looks fairly deliberate. There's no fragments you're seeing. That's disappeared.
I think if once it's damaged, once it starts to pick up damage, all the printer would do is just take a file or a knife to it and just clean it up,
right?
So it wouldn't damage the sheets.
Right, I see. If you don't get odd bits of metal floating about.
Yeah, you wouldn't want that, but you'd pick up quite quickly if something was going wrong, and you just get in there and sort it before it did any serious damage to anything else.
Yes. The other thing is, could you possibly go back to where you were discussing single and double marginal rules for the 1899 set, the postage?
There we go.
Soon.
These. Yeah.
One bit further down, next one down, maybe.
Oh,
no,
right.
no, sorry. Okay, next one up. You were saying that once something was not seen as only had one example single, or
oh, right,
Diamond
yes.
had one example single. What was that one?
Hang on. No, hang on.
The 4 cent, wasn't it? I think it was 4 cent.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Hang on. Well, let's see. Oh, yes. 25 cent.
Oh, 25 cent. Oh,
right. There's currently only one known copy with a single marginal rule.
Oh, on the 25 cents.
On the 25 cents, yes.
Okay, so all the other values of this are known single and double, or what?
They're all known single and double. No, sorry. It's only the 2 cent, the 4 cent, the 8 cent, the 12 cent, and 25 cent that have double.
Oh, right.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
But of those, with the exception of the 25 cent, all the others are relatively easy to find them both single or double.
Right.
In the case of the 25 cent, is currently we only have one example, and it's a single stamp,
yes,
of a 25 cent with a single marginal rule.
Okay.
Whereas
it could have been damaged, of course. Could it? It just lost that bit of marginal rule sometime during the print run.
Possible, but much more likely that one printing was done, and it's just because the problem with the higher values is they didn't tend to survive in large lumps because, of course, they were too expensive.
Yeah.
So, chances of finding a full sheet of the 25 cent is diminishingly small. I think Simon's got a 32 cents.
Yeah. Unless they're in the archives, of course.
I got my 32 cents. The 32 cents is not in great condition, but I've never seen another.
No, I think because I've got a couple of big blocks in a similar condition, and I think they must have been left over and then got sold off at some later point, because they're quite badly browned and tropicalized, aren't they? So I think they were probably left in a drawer and then.
I mean,
but under normal circumstances, and under normal circumstances, nobody goes out and buys $61 stamps and keeps them. Not at that kind of time. So it's only the lower values where we see big enough blocks to be pedantic about. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Jolly good show. Any other questions while we're
Have you finished?
We're finished. Oh,
right. Okay. Absolutely fascinating. So sorry I missed the first part, but I got the wrong code.
Sorry.
I am absolutely fascinated by your well, I think proven hypothesis, quite frankly, that Sarawak, because it was on ordinary paper, enabled De La Rue to make a lot of experimental work during the first or the last decade of the 19th century and the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, my interest in De La Rue starts rather later, in the 1940s. And interestingly, by then, it seems to me that things had changed quite a lot. And I wondered if you'd like to comment on just one fact, for example, that when they were printing one of the, I think it was the 2 cents of the state settlement stamps, they ran for most of the time, they ran 2 plates, one for the head and one for the value. And that had 2, what I'm going to call Jubilee lines. But there is one printing, but there's only one Jubilee line. And that's not because they used a hand press to change the value, which I think you suggested for Sarawak, but simply because they had another plate which had the whole thing done in one color. So wherever you have a one color operation, rather like this 4 cents that we're looking at the moment, yeah,
Yes.
it is possible to have a printing with one Jubilee line, which is not a double printing, it's a single printing.
Yes.
Now,
And I can tell you
at what stage you think those major changes took place.
I can tell you exactly, beginning of the George V reign, because for Ceylon, some of the values, it was cheaper to make a modified die with the value incorporated. These were Imperium stamps. I have some full sheets of these. What they did was, for I think the 3 cents, 5 cents, and I think the 6 cents, they actually made plates which looked like an Imperium plate, i.e. a double printing, but with the value fixed, and used those to do a single pass printing because it was cheaper for the volumes required than doing the double pass process we're looking at here. So for Ceylon on George V Imperiums, that occurred, and
But
they
it
made
required them, of course, to have the same colours.
Yes, you had to have the same colour.
They obviously couldn't do dual colours on a single plate.
No, but the usual way to tell is if the value tablet is accurately centered.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can pick up the Ceylon issues easily because the value tablet is absolutely spot on central. There is no slightly out.
Yeah, and I mean, with the straight settlements, it's much easier because you've actually got two different dies, and you know the palm trees on the right hand side either have two sprigs or only one. It's very, very easy.
Yes.
But it's the date that I'm really interested in. You think it was probably 1937?
No, hang on.
Or much earlier.
I've got the tedious book. The tedious book. Where's Ceylon?
It was much earlier, was it?
It was much earlier. I think it was
close to your 1928 printings.
No, hang on. Let me just.
1908 and 1911 Brunei. The Brunei 1 cent and 3 cents you found in the 1908 was in the 2 plate, as far as I can see, and then 1911 they went to a single
plate. That's right.
Yeah. 19. Oh, I think
single colour and single plate. And they chopped the bottom.
Yeah, 1918.
Quarter off.
Yeah, well, these are earlier. These are 1908 and 1911, according to the Gibbons catalogue.
Right.
That's
so
what it says in the De La Rue Day Book, because in the De La Rue Day Book they started the discussion with the 3 cent scarlet, and they had to do one printing with the 2 plates, and then they converted and had new plates made for the 3 cent, which was a single printing, single colour.
Was it 1911?
Yes.
1911.
Yeah.
It went to the single plate. Yeah.
I think it must be. George V key plates. Yes, that must have been about 1911, 1912 as well.
Okay, so thank you for that. So just to recap, you have examples of Sarawak printings with double Jubilee lines, invariably because they were printed on an automatic press.
Effectively,
both printings were automatic.
Yes, yeah, and then De La Rue's letter to the postmaster confirms that was in fact the case, which is
right. So
fantastic.
Fine. Sorry, just to get this into my thick head.
Yeah.
You don't have an example of a Sarawak printing where the value tablet was put on by hand process with a double Jubilee line.
Well, we can't tell. We have to assume that when De La Rue wrote back to the Postmaster General and said, if it's got 2 lines around it, both printings were done on the machines, and if it's got and if it hasn't, then the value tablet was basically put in by hand on the hand machines, i.e. on the Albion presses.
Yep.
And that would make, that would make sense.
Well, it certainly makes sense, yes. But of course, we're all in philately. We're always looking for the bit that doesn't make sense.
Yes,
it gives us fun to research and find out. And there's always the bugger's muddle philatelist who manages to find something which is different.
Yes, indeed.
But thank you. That's very, very interesting, and I've enjoyed that hugely.
Oh, good. Well, I'm pleased tonight. I think it's quite an interesting story. I think it puts Sarawak in a slightly different light with respect to De La Rue.
But would that explain then, Malcolm, why we have these especially 1918 to 28, all these strange watermark things with multiple planes, single plane watermarks, various colour trials of the 1 cent? Is it just De La Rue experimenting using Sarawak stamps?
Yes, I think so. I think Sarawak was as far as I can tell, Sarawak was the only non-empire country who's effectively, because everything else was controlled by either the Crown agents or by the Inland Revenue at Somerset House, and everything had to be accounted, and particularly paper. There was a maximum wastage, and there's some correspondence in the archive where a sheet of paper went missing. A single sheet of watermarked paper went missing, and De La Rue had to apologise profusely because it had been mislaid.
Because I have a sheet of the watermark paper, the 2 cents.
What, the trefoil?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was produced for Sudan, but
No.
it was used for Sudan, but it was an internal De La Rue paper. They actually paid to have that watermark. You see, all the other watermarks, the dandy rolls, were paid for by the Treasury or the Crown agents and were their property.
Because at the $25 of Brunei, some of the sheets were badly printed, and in fact, Crown agents invoiced De La Rue for the waste paper.
Mm.
They had to pay it.
Yes, they were very touchy about, because effectively it was considered to be what's the word I'm looking for? Because these were money, effectively, as far as the Treasury was concerned. The watermarked paper was a critical part of that process. Therefore, they actually had their own people in De La Rue to keep an eye on all of this.
Because if you read in their day book, they say, the printing will be ready for your inspector.
Yeah.
And they say, so the inspector used to go into De La Rue and inspect the printing to make sure that the any wastage they actually got and saw destroyed, because, as you say, the watermark paper was money.
Yes, the watermark paper was money. You're absolutely right, Claire. And
I think he pretty well lived there.
Hmm?
I think the inspector pretty well lived there.
No, he didn't. No, because they were often complaining that his hours were inadequate for their printing process.
Oh, right, that's interesting.
But it's very interesting to see in the De La Rue archives that the order from the Sarawak government through Crown agents for X number of sheets or X number of registered envelopes. Okay.
Yes.
De La Rue would invariably supply an excess of the amount of sheets or envelopes ordered.
Yes.
Because the actual printing of the stuff is quite cheap, but so you get 5,000 registered envelopes ordered, and you get 5,037, or you ask for 60 sheets or 100 sheets, and you get 111 sheets.
Yeah, that's because the printers are trundling away merrily, and they usually do a few spare over just in case anything's spotted. Anything gets scrapped on inspection, because of course all these they're printed and they go off to dry properly before they're then bundled up, inspected, and perforated and inspected. So they'll always do a few over in case anything goes wrong further down the chain. But of course, if everything goes to spec and there's no wastage, then of course they're either spare or they invoice them, and they tended to invoice them.
To come back to the multiple airplane and single airplane watermark, which has always been a mystery. I mean, perhaps they were using the paper just to use that paper. Because the only issue that ever had that watermark paper was a Luxembourg issue. And yet
but if you've got stamps from the inside of it, you won't know.
You've got blocks of Sarawak with this watermark issue. With this watermark.
It's not a high value.
I think they use these as a handy test bed. That's why I think there's quite so much. There was quite so much for a small country in the archive. You know, in even things like the the die proofs and things.
When the
Malcolm, have you looked at China?
No. There are limits at the moment.
No, I mean seriously, because you mentioned that Sarawak was the only country which wasn't involved either with the Somerset House government or the Crown agents. I'm fairly sure that China was independent of that, wasn't it?
I don't know, and
hang on a minute. I'll go and get a book.
I don't know much about. I have to be honest. De La Rue's printings of Chinese stamps.
It's De La Rue and the paper.
This is the one.
Actually owned by Crown agents.
Sorry?
One of the aspects of this is that the paper was actually owned by Crown agents.
Yes.
So if De La Rue printed some extra sheets, they were the property of the Crown. Crown agents were going to be sent out to the colony.
Yes, either that or they would have to be destroyed.
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily, because Crown agents always held a stock of. So not all the sheets that were, well, at least with Brunei, not all the sheets that were printed actually went out to Brunei. So Brunei would ask for an order and that would be completed, and any of the excess then went into the Crown agents' stock. And then sometimes you would see that Brunei did a reorder of a certain denomination, and that came out of stock from previous printing rather than being reprinted, because Crown agents had got enough stock to supply it, because Crown agents would actually supply the UK philatelic market. So you only know if the stamps actually went out because the sheets were numbered. If the sheets weren't numbered, they stayed in the Crown agents archive and never left the UK.
All right. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Because for lots of countries, yes, the sheets are not numbered until much later, and you do see some very odd numbers in terms of sheets shipped versus original order request numbers.
Because if you read the De La Rue, it'll say, in some of them it'll say shipped airmail, some of them will say sent to Crown agent stock, some of it is sent, they actually explain in there how many sheets, well, they don't actually say how many sheets, but they do say going to stock and so on.
All right. I'm
Brunei were really only ordering in penny numbers by De La Rue standards. And so
ordering what?
Brunei were only ordering in penny numbers by De La Rue standards. And so
penny numbers?
Very small quantities.
They had to have 5,000 sheets. That was the minimum print run.
Yeah, they were ordering a lot less than that. And De La Rue was doing the full print run, and that's probably why Crown agents were holding them back. And then,
but they didn't always hold them back.
They sent them off.
Yeah, they didn't always hold them back. It was not on. It wasn't on every print that it actually went into the Crown agent stock.
Yeah, if there was a significant number, they used to ask the colony the question, do they want them? But The point is that the paper was owned by Crown agents, and therefore they had to be paid for one way or another.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the country paid for the paper.
Yeah.
And that's why it was so crucial, the accounting actually at De La Rue.
Yeah. That's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah.
Yes, this is why the whole thing was so tetchy, which is why, as I said, yeah. So Sarawak was a very convenient, not a tetchy subject as far as the paper was
and
concerned.
they could play, couldn't they? Because they could destroy the paper and just try different papers, and Sarawak wouldn't know, and there wasn't that cost.
No, there was no inspection. There was no control. No. Whereas all the others, they had the men in permanently watching what was going on and inspecting what had been produced and cross-checking paper numbers and everything else.
There's some very interesting printers waste, which is actually for the 1952 issue, where they changed the design to the Sultan Omar Allies Fusion's head, because you can find this green paper that has the 1947 issue printed on it, and then in what would be the perforation lines centered, you've got Sultan Omar, his head is printed. And it's almost like, I mean, that one has never made any sense to me, what De La Rue was doing.
Well, the green, I can tell you what the green paper is. The green paper they used for setup.
Yes.
Because it doesn't have a watermark.
Why would they keep it? Why would they keep it?
It's difficult to tell. Lots of things, by the time you're talking about, De La Rue have got much sloppier.
Right.
So the quality of the printing's gone down the tubes, to be quite frank, and everything else. And so I suspect it's associated with the fact that it was not the crisp, controlled organisation it had been by that point. I mean, when we talk about the marginal rules, they're all over the place by the time you get to George VI and Queen Elizabeth II. I mean, I haven't even dared go there. I've got a few examples of bent, twisted, all sorts of problems. So the whole quality control process had all gone out the window, and I think that's probably why. But the green paper, I can't easily show you. I can. Yeah, I think I might be able to. Green paper. Hang on. Now let's see if this works. This is there we go. Oh, is it there? Yes, there. Right. I'm not sure if you can see that. That's a block of right. That's unappropriated dyes. That's setup paper used with black ink on the machine to get everything set up and functioning. Once that was done, they would do a...
Still seeing your slides, Malcolm.
Oh, sorry. Shall I turn them off now?
Well, we might see whatever the sheet is talking about.
Oh, I see what you mean. Hang on a moment. Oh, for heaven's sake. Now, how do I do this? Stop share. There we go. There we go. Right. Let's try this. Right. So there is it's not very well. It's a block of 4 of the unappropriated dyes. And that's on a sort of greeny paper. And that's the final pull. What they would do with the machines is they would set them up using black ink, because black ink was cheap and it allowed them to mess around until everything was spot on. They would then, as far as I can tell, pull off a single reference sheet in black ink on this green paper as the final inspection for that setup. If the supervisor then agreed that was a go, then they would clean the rollers, set it to the right colour, and go with the right paper and the right ink.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Those strange Brunei things with the front and front and reverse printed on. Did they come out the front door or the back door of De La Rue?
Oh, my understanding is that there was a cleaner at De La Rue in that period.
And
who had a relationship with a dealer, and there was a pub on the other side of the road. So when he finished cleaning, he used to go to the pub, and when the printers had left, he'd let himself back in. And I think he got £10. It was either £10 an item or whatever he managed to salvage on that particular night out of the wastepaper basket. He got £10 for. So yes, it was actually the cleaner who, which is why we've got printer samples.
Yes.
The ones of Omar Ali's head, where you've got the vignette on one side of the frame on the other side, those ones I don't know. I don't know if those ones we can't find any information about at all.
And that's likely to be from doing setup.
Yeah.
Are they in black?
No, in colour.
No.
Oh, they might have been first pulls off.
So on one side you've got the frame in colour,
Yeah.
and then on the other side, so if you hold it up, they match.
Yeah.
So it was always thought that it was always queried if it was printer's waste, whereas the green one, you've got the two different stamps.
Yes. Yeah.
Printed on top of each other. Just
They
in
might
different
have.
positions.
They might have just been playing with the alignment and just used the same sheet of same paper twice.
Yes.
With the we'll check the registration's working, or we'll just turn it round and run it through again.
We had some Malaya 1948 alternatives for several states escape at the same period. Presumably the same person was involved.
Yeah. There's several countries in which he pilfered the wastepaper baskets.
Malcolm, I have a generic question I've only just thought of.
Yep.
It's okay. So parochially Sarawak, but it actually happened around the world as well. De La Rue 1928 set of Sarawak was a very successful printing.
Yep.
Sarawak then went Waterloo and then Bradbury Wilkinson.
Yep.
A lot of countries went from De La Rue to Bradbury Wilkinson, not necessarily to Waterloo, but definitely Bradbury Wilkinson. What happened with the world to suddenly be dissatisfied with De La Rue in the late 20s, early 30s?
De La Rue was still stuck using Wolfdale printers, whereas some of the other had gone over to things like photogravure, offset, litho. They'd invested in new machinery.
So cheaper
and faster.
Oh.
Right, De La Rue really did lost their way. I mean, after Sir Andros, I was going to say spent the third generation spent the family fortune on big houses and parties, and wasn't prepared to move. That's why De La Rue lost the contract with Somerset House, and the printing of all the GB stamps went initially to Somerset House and then to Harrison's, and they really got stuck in the mud. So they were still using the same technology, the same machines as they had been back in 1880s.
I've never thought of that question before.
How history repeats itself.
Yes.
They just lost the contract for printing British passports.
Yes. Yeah. They keep doing. I mean, we're N generations down now, but it was very much.
They lost the bank one in the 70s and 80s for a while.
Yeah, just a failure to adapt and adopt modern technology.
I look at Xerox. I mean, Xerox went from being, everybody knew what a Xerox was to nothing.
Yeah.
And now they've reinvented themselves. Same as, these Kodak reinvented themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, technology comes and goes, doesn't it? So something that's working now in a few years' time is suddenly old hat.
I've never thought of that question before. Never. And there's nothing in any of the literature saying why it happened. There's a bit in Forester Wood saying the Raja liked his portrait much better on the Waterloo stamps than he did on the De La Rue stamp.
No, it was.
No, I think it was a universal issue. I mean, it went right across the stamp printing echelon of the whole place. People got much more interested in the costs as the amount of stamps required went up.
Well, yes, and the sheer volume in terms of being able to do it.
And there's plenty of information, I think, in other literature on Great Britain and other organisations about the changes between one printer and another.
Yeah, and the big change was, of course, the print technology. So as I said, things like photogravure, offset litho, all of these technologies meant that you could produce very much more quickly, and the plates were cheaper to make.
Yes, although interestingly, in North Borneo, for example, they went from Blades Eastern Blades, which were actually lithographic printers, to Waterloo, who were printing from intaglio.
Yes.
In 1894.
Yes, but that was fairly good technology at that point. It was only, by the time we get to sort of the 1920s, that all of a sudden there's a whole raft of new ideas starting.
Yeah. Sorry, but, Malcolm, I'm not disagreeing.
Oh, but yeah, sorry. I'm with you now.
I'm simply pointing out that the same thing happened 30 years earlier. When they moved from one type of technology to another.
Yes.
And Waterloos were way ahead. They'd done the investment. Blades Eastern Blades hadn't.
Yes. Yeah. Indeed. I think that's true of in quite a lot of these areas.
I guess Blades Eastern Blades, it was always a sideline, wasn't it? Printing stamps wasn't their main business, was it?
Yes. Although interestingly, since I did some research on them for a thing. The other day, I've discovered one or two other stamps that they printed. People have sent in things to me.
Oh, really?
Very, very obscure things. I must say.
So still not big business. It's not big business, really.
Most interesting.
Yeah.
The late 1920s, the economic situation would have made the cost of printing stamps an even more important factor.
Yeah, depression. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, very much so. Yeah. So yes, I think there were lots of things hovering over the horizon, and De La Rue just failed to pay attention, really.
Malcolm, perhaps at that point, we should all thank you for an absolutely fascinating talk, and wish everybody well.
Well done, Malcolm.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Well done.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay.
Goodbye.
Cheers. Yes, good night. Okay. Oh, is he going to press the go button, Roger?